We've completed all the sound checks and all the weather reports, so we now know that it's a nice day here in Ottawa and elsewhere. Our first hour, we have representing the Office of the National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman Gregory Lick, a familiar face before this committee. Welcome again, sir. And Robin Hines, Director General of Operations, and virtually Colonel Nishka Jardine. Welcome, and thank you for the weather report. And Dwayne Shippers, Deputy Veterans Ombudsman. So with that, you have 5-minute opening statements, Mr. Lick, and I'll let you proceed for the next 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. Chers membres du comité, bonjour. Thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this important topic. There have been many studies on individual or collective aspects of military to civilian transition, access to health care, and barriers to access benefits and services on both the DND, CAF, and the Veterans Affairs Canada sides. Parliamentary committees and both of our officers have made many recommendations that either have yet to be implemented or will not be implemented. Simply put, it can be hard to hold the government to account in this regard. We must get this issue right for members transitioning from military to civilian life. This process represents more than a change of jobs or retirement. For many members, the Canadian Armed Forces forms a critical part of their identity. In leaving the CAF, they lose that connection while facing physical, mental, or moral injuries. If you do military transition well, you will have a good civilian. Mon bureau fait le suivi des recommandations.
My office issues follows up to recommendations contained in our systemic investigation reports. We have clear criteria by which we determine whether our recommendations are fully implemented or partially implemented or not implemented at all. We post these reports on our public website. Since 2016, the results have not been promising regarding the topic you are currently studying.
Released reports on 3 investigations, 1 on operational stress injuries in the primary reserves, and 2 focusing on the process of transition from military to civilian life. We made 8 recommendations, 7 of which the Minister accepted. None of the accepted recommendations have been fully implemented. Let me be clear. Our office has a great relationship with the Department and the CAF at the working level. Since 2018, the CAF has accepted and implemented all of our recommendations made which resulted from individual investigations. That's a track record that I and Ms. Hines, as the head of our operations group, are incredibly proud of. But it's the slow movement on the recommendations made stemming from our systemic investigations that often experience slow progress. Prenons an example.
Take one important example. In 2016, our office recommended that no member of the Canadian Armed Forces should be medically released without all benefits and services from all sources, including Veterans Affairs Canada, in place.
So did the Senate Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs. So too, in fact, did SSC Initiative 28, where the government set out its goal to ensure that all benefits will be in place before a member transitions to post-military life. The government claims to have checked this initiative off their list, but in our analysis, they have not. How do we know this? Our office still receives cases. People are still falling through the cracks. Other organizations exist to provide emergency services to current and former CAF members, including those in the transition process, who are still called to help out. And perhaps worse, potentially many more veterans are not coming forward to indicate that they are unprepared for release, that their benefits and services are not in place, and a timely VAC adjudication is not on the horizon. Whatever their reasons, we know that the principal problem is slow VAC adjudications. The backlogs have been well documented publicly, and the OVO can best address these issues. I can say with great certainty that this is not a people problem. You have people within VAC who want to do the right thing. It is a process problem. All the new hires and all the money spent to this point would have resolved the issues were those the root causes. Des solutions
Solutions have been put forward. We know that improving processes related to service attribution and faster benefits adjudication decisions would go a long way to improving the transition process.
act and be accountable for our actions. We must ensure that the closer we bring the adjudication of an illness or injury to the onset of the illness or injury itself, with well-articulated causes and diagnoses by CAF medical personnel, the speedier the outcome will be in adjudication. For example, the CAF expanded access to the Canadian Forces Health Information System, which houses medical information required by VAC staff to analyze files and render decisions on VAC benefits and services. However, VAC then put barriers in place which cause delay and prevent staff from completing their work promptly. Committee members, I am not all doom and gloom. I have seen the good promise that the CAF transition group could make. I hear this from members assigned to the transition units. It's going better. I'm very much hoping that they can reach full operating capability by 2024. In
2025, we plan on launching an investigation to review how these initiatives will shake out. But I can almost guarantee that some of our recommendations will be the same as they have been for the last decade or more.
Mr. Lick, Mr. Lick, sorry. The 5 minutes is passed.
I have one more paragraph.
One more paragraph. Okay.
Additionally, this is me personally. I have made it my mission before the end of my term to try to bring resolution to the many issues and challenges facing military families. The proper treatment of families will weigh significantly on our ability to recruit and retain CAF members. We have seen through new statistics that family issues can significantly contribute to members' release. Therefore, the treatment of families is an issue of national security. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I now turn it over to Colonel Jardine.
Thank you. Actually, you don't. I turn it over to Colonel Jardine, but that's just a technical thing. So, yeah. So, yeah. Colonel Jardine, we all are awaiting what you have to say for the next 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to contribute to your study, including challenges associated with medical release and transition to civilian life. As the Veterans Ombud, my mandate is to receive and review complaints from clients of Veterans Affairs Canada, or VAC, who feel that they have been treated unfairly. I can also review systemic gaps in or barriers to equitable access to VAC programs and benefits. Depuis plusieurs années,
Understanding the impact of transition on veterans and their families has been a focus of Veterans Ombud for the past several years. In 2017, we published a qualitative study to better understand the factors that contribute to a successful transition from military to civilian life. Participants reported that their main challenges included finding a new sense of purpose, maintaining financial security, equating military experience with civilian work experience, and coping with the stigma around mental health.
New veterans will seek employment post-service, both for financial reasons and to meet the need for a new sense of purpose. There are workplaces who do not understand what veterans bring to the table, but there are many more who do not. VAC offers a career transition service to assist serving members and veterans in their journey to civilian employment. However, we have heard from veterans that there is still a gap in translating military competencies to civilian competencies, particularly in the officer occupations. Finding a job and finding purpose are for many veterans the same thing. When their service experience is unrecognizable to hiring managers, it can become a barrier to successful transition. Veterans with a medical release have access to significant support both on their way out of the CAF and then onwards from VAC. I am far more concerned about veterans who release voluntarily or for other reasons, in particular those with insufficient years of service, to be immediately eligible to receive their CAF pension, which is the determining factor for access to the public service healthcare plan or the pensioner's dental service plan. These non-medically released veterans with less than 20 or 25 years of service, who may nevertheless have service-related illness or injuries, are the ones I am most concerned about. Delays by VAC in adjudicating disability claims can have tangible impacts on their well-being. VAC recently implemented a new program whereby some veterans who submit disability claims for mental health will have immediate access to treatment benefits. I believe this immediate access to treatment benefits should be extended to all disability claimants, or as we recommended in 2018, VAC should triage claims according to unmet health needs. En 2021,
In 2021, we recommended that VAC provide mental health support for family members in their own right for conditions related to their veteran service. Over the past few months, I have heard heartbreaking stories of veteran spouses and family members who are left to struggle on their own. We say that when a member serves, their family serves with them. We say that families are the strength behind the uniform, and yet it takes very little for these important people to be disconnected from help they need in their own right. I am more convinced than ever that we cannot continue to rely on spouses and family for their immeasurable, irreplaceable, and invaluable support to the CAF's operational capacity and then not meet their mental health needs as a result of supporting a veteran during their service.
on release, new veterans were pretty much on their own to figure out how to thrive as they returned to civilian life. There was and continues to be great support for those who are released for medical reasons, but that was and is not necessarily the case for everyone else. Over the past few years, there has been a growing recognition that the transition from military to veteran is not just a simple matter of handing back your uniform and your ID card. Just as entering the CAF is a bit of a shock, basic training is designed, after all, to instill discipline, leadership, teamwork, service before self, putting yourself in harm's way, and yes, using weapons. Leaving the CAF can be just as significant. I firmly believe that once you've successfully completed basic training, you are forever changed. You are never truly civilian again. When we leave the CAF, we are veterans. Over the past several months, I have visited a number of the transition centers, and I'm encouraged by what I see. Extending strong support to all new veterans in the same way that has been done for medically released veterans will go a long way to easing the transition from military back to civilian life. As a Veterans Ombudsman, I'm focused on the important and lifelong relationship between veterans and Veterans Affairs Canada. The transition centers have a huge role to play in getting that relationship off on the right foot. Je remercie.
Thank you again for the invitation to contribute to your work for the Canadian Armed Forces and our veterans. I look forward to your recommendations.
Thank you, Colonel Jardine. I have Ms. Gallant for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Ombudsman, Mr. Lick, would you please outline the steps that are involved in the process of being medically discharged?
It could take probably the whole hour to do that, but what I'll do is I'm going to hand it to Ms. Hines to take you through those steps and very general things. But what we can do also is we can forward that information to in a little bit more written format too afterwards to give you some of that detail.
Okay, but just as short as possible answer right now, please.
Absolutely.
So there are three main phases, excuse me, to medical release. The first phase is really the period of time between when the injury or the diagnosis of the illness happens and when the Director of Military Careers Administration makes the decision on whether or not the member will be medically released. There are times, of course, that a member is injured and is capable to return back to work. So that's the first phase. The second phase is really the period of time between a member receiving the decision that they will be medically released and the actual release date. So the planning that goes into the transition of the medical release to ensure continuity of care, for example, before that member is released. And then finally, the last period is really between when the member is released and up to 2 years after, when they may be eligible for a number of benefits and services through both the Canadian Armed Forces, through all three, Canadian Armed Forces, CISIP, and Veterans Affairs Canada.
Okay, we still have this situation where soldiers are medically released due to injuries they incur on the job. Yet when they go through the transition process and are in civilian life, they have to go to a civilian doctor in order to be assessed for which benefits they'll receive. So they're being released from the military due to their injuries. Then they get to the veterans stage and they have to prove that they've got the injuries. How can that contradiction be solved so that they don't have to fight after they've just been kicked out of the military because of the injuries and they don't have universality of service?
I mean, it's an excellent question, and it is one we've already studied and made a recommendation on in this case, that it kind of makes sense that the people that are treating you, that have knowledge of the military environment in which you work, same as a company, they will examine you, and they are currently your doctor already, that they will make that attribution. It's kind of obvious when you break your leg on a paratroop, parachuting out of a plane, and you break your leg. It's kind of obvious that it happened on the job. You don't need another civilian doctor to kind of tell you that. So that's why we made the recommendation that the CAF will be best suited to be able to make that attribution of injury due to service type of thing. So that would be our solution. There may be elements within the CAF of how to do that, but they're the ones with the best knowledge.
Okay. So what steps needed to be taken to have a seamless transfer between DND and CAF to Veterans Affairs, and a seamless interprovincial transfer of documents during service with the CAF versus immediately after discharge?
Well, certainly on the first element of it, reiterate what I just said, essentially, that the earlier that service attribution of an injury is made before they release from the Canadian Armed Forces, the better and the more efficient the adjudication would be in VAC. So what we've recommended before, and we continue to recommend, is that have that service attribution done before they release, so that the adjudication of whatever benefits they should receive is done much more quickly. On the second part of your question on the transfer of documentation, we are actually seeing it better in terms of transfer from CAF to Veterans Affairs. That's happening better now, particularly because there are more electronic documents. But the issue that you raised of transferring it to civilian doctors, that's a particularly difficult one. I don't really have a solution for that one per se, but making them electronic. And one of the things that we did hear from a number of people, but putting them on a CD, nowadays, when most computers don't have CD players, something as simple as that, having it put on a memory stick with appropriate security, those are the little small things that cause a lot of irritation for people, and it would make the transition more seamless for that transfer of documentation.
So do you find that certain provinces there's a difference between provinces in the transfer of records and transfer of care, or is the same level of time and difficulty across the board?
That I couldn't really comment on. I think that question would be better for the Surgeon General, just in terms of how they might find that transfer of documentation. I don't think we have any complaints in that regard that we've received that I know of.
How quickly can an injured soldier see a specialist when still in the forces?
Very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a report recently that said that the doctors were in the military were told to underreport adverse reactions to one of the shots that they're given. In your document, in your report, you mentioned that one of the potential problems is inaccurate or incomplete reporting. One, has this come to your attention? Have you looked into it? And two, if all the medical aspects of what's happened to the soldier are not recorded, will that have an impact eventually, should there be any consequences to that when they are out of the forces?
Well, on the latter part of your question, absolutely. Sure. If the medical documentation is not full and complete, it doesn't talk about the reasons for the injury and things like that, then the adjudication just becomes slower. They have to find other information. They may have to look through other documents that maybe not medical in nature, maybe their deployment documents, where they were deployed to, those types of things. The issue is not that in our complaints that come to our office is not so much, certainly not about direction to underreport. That is not what we hear. The issue might be that medical professionals are not putting all the information in that they require. The same thing likely happens in civilian medical systems too as well. But in this case, the VAC has to use that information to make adjudication. If it's not complete, then the adjudication process just becomes slower. So the more complete the documentation, faster adjudication.
We're going to have to leave it there. Mr. May, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to both witnesses for being here today and helping us with this study. I have questions. I hope I'll get both questions in here for both of you, but I'll start with Mr. Lick. I understand the Ombudsman Office is currently conducting a systemic investigation, specifically with a focus on mental health. Can you share with us today any of the preliminary insights from that investigation?
Certainly. We'll, since we haven't provided it to the minister just yet, we'll cover a few of the findings that we've, but not the recommendations just yet. So in that regard, the systemic investigation, which we have just completed and are just about to provide it to the minister, was for the purpose of looking at how are primary reservists treated in respect, in comparison to regular force personnel on domestic operations with regards to their mental health. So there are certainly some issues there, similar to what we just talked about with Ms. Gallant, in terms of that continuity of care. So if something happens on a domestic operation, certainly you can have mental health issues as a result of certain, many domestic operations, including going into long-term care homes that we saw over the pandemic. In that regard, but one of the issues is that there's not enough information, or certainly primary reservists and leadership teams may not be as aware of all the benefits and services and supports that they can receive as a result of injury, whether it's mental health or physical health, acquired on a domestic operation. So communication of that information is really important to make sure that primary reservists, in this case, understand what they could receive. Also, making sure that periodic health assessments are done. And in this case, primary reservists, me being one of them, during my career as a reservist, I received 2 PHAs during my 17 years. It's supposed to happen much more often than that. And right now, we've seen that not all primary reservists are receiving those periodic health assessments. So it's very difficult then to understand, after a domestic operation, have they either received an injury from that domestic operation, or have they aggravated an injury that they may have already had? In this case, we're talking about mental health. So those are just a few of the areas of findings that we've found, and we will be making recommendations to the minister and to the department in that regard.
Do you have a sense of the timeline for that report?
The minister will receive it within about probably a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. Colonel Jardine, I want to sort of shift gears a little bit, and we often hear that the CAF have been predominantly a male institution. This is historic, and as a result, the design of services and supports around health and well-being have been designed around men. And this would apply, of course, to veteran supports as well. To you, Colonel, what are some of the gaps that emerge out of this for women and gender diverse members and veterans?
Thank you for the question. We did a study. It was a literature review last year, I believe it was, where we found a number of significant differences between how service affects men and how service affects women, and there are a number of gaps and impacts. If we have time, I would invite my colleague, Mr. Shippers, to give you a taste of some of that. But we know that service impacts women differently in many ways. And from Veterans Affairs as well, you're quite right. The support and the benefits and services were designed with men in mind. It was just the default, the norm. What we know today is that the table of disabilities is being reviewed through a lens, a gender-based analysis lens, and we look forward to seeing what those changes are going to be. We haven't seen them yet. We did a report on sexual dysfunction and how, for example, the medical questionnaire for men, when they go to see the doctor with this questionnaire that's given to them by VAC, one of the questions on it is around erectile dysfunction or sexual dysfunction. But on the women's questionnaire, there is no such question. And yet we know that women also experience sexual dysfunction. And so there's those kind of gaps. I'll leave it to you if you would like to hear more about specific examples. If you'd like to hear from Mr. Shippers, I'll let you make that decision.
He has about 30 seconds here. Go ahead, Mr. Shippers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Women are 2 to 3 times more likely to have medically released than men veterans. 45% due to mental health. 43% due to musculoskeletal issues. Compared to women in the Canadian general population, more likely to have PTSD, 80 to 90% higher risk of suicide than men, and men veterans have a 40% higher risk of suicide than men in the Canadian general population. Women who release as non-commissioned members, so not the non-officer category, 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women who release as officers. There's some serious income issues as well.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Mr. May didn't leave you a lot of time.
No problem, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Yeah. Blindingly obvious. People can count. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the 2 witnesses. I want to start with a question for you, Mr. Lick. You said that one of your recommendations that you made was that a member of the armed forces should never be receive medical release without the right support being in place. Was the recommendation accepted by government? Well, they said it was put into place, but after that, you realized that that wasn't really the case in actual fact. So my first question is it problematic that it's the government that is not should be the one correcting its own mistake, or maybe the recommendation or the statement that the recommendation has been implemented should be done by somebody other than the government?
If I may, I will answer in English because of the technical nature of it. Yes, our recommendation still stands that, and it was accepted by the government in this case, that all benefits and services should be in place before they are medically released. They are not there yet. Part of the issue, as we talked about earlier, was the fact that in some cases the service attribution is not being done in an efficient manner. Talked about that already. Adjudications, therefore, are slow. There is a tremendous backlog in that regard. And what I said in my opening remarks, that you have a lot of people in VAC who want to do the right thing. It's absolutely true. I hear it all the time, actually. But at the same time, they're stifled or shackled by the process issues, and there are many of them. And I encourage the committee to explore those more than anything. But certainly, I think in this regard, with respect to your question around whether it should be an outside agency of some sort, I don't believe so. I think in that regard, I think in terms of service attribution, making sure that happens quickly, the best people to do it are the people that are treating you and have knowledge of your environment within CAF Health Services. That aspect, I think, is probably best done by the CAF, as we've already recommended. In terms of the services and supports and everybody, I think VAC is well positioned to be able to do that. I wouldn't want to hand it to another insurance agency. I don't think that's the right thing either. So I think VAC is probably best positioned to be able to do that. They just need better processes to do that.
En fait, ma question.
Well, my question was really more about an assessment of the implementation of your recommendation. So like when you make a recommendation and then the government says, yes, we have implemented that recommendation, and then you say, well, we feel like it hasn't been implemented. Do you think that it's a body other than the government that has to do an assessment of that implementation?
This becomes then the issue of who is best positioned to have oversight over different departments, in this case, the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence. I think we are well positioned to be able to provide that oversight. Are there better means of doing that? I've already talked very publicly about the need for independence in that regard. So allowing, making sure that the department responds in a timely manner to our report recommendations, which I'm not seeing right now, even though they've accepted them in the end generally. But I'm also becoming, as I come near the end of my term, I become another year left, I become more and more frustrated not seeing action. I think even all of you as committee members are facing the same thing, that you've made recommendations. They say they've been implemented, or we're in the process of implementing them. Well, people are suffering as a result of that, and that's not right.
Et justement, par rapport à
Yes, about that. You said that you observed that the recommendation was not really implemented because you received some calls in that regard. But do you really have enough sources of information to be able to analyze whether those recommendations were truly implemented, or do you need to have other sources of information to better follow up your recommendations? Well, I think we have access to all the necessary information to be able to follow up on our recommendations.
Progress reports. So one of the differences that I always talk about in my audiences is the difference between us and the Auditor General. The Auditor General does the same types of reports for various departments, but what happens to it after that? How is it progressed? What we do is we put all of our progress reports on our website. It's accessible to everyone. It shows, according to our assessment, not the department's assessment, our assessment as to whether they are progressing on the recommendations or not. That is incredibly powerful. It doesn't always get the action as quickly as we would like, but it's a means of getting it more action. And we do see a tremendous amount of benefit from doing that too as well. It provides you as committee members, it provides all of the public with heat and light and transparency on what is being done or not being done.
Je vais tout de suite juste.
I'm going to mention what would be my next question. It would be to either one of you about the veterans who leave the armed forces voluntarily. I want to know if afterwards, did we notice that those people had some mental health issues but didn't really receive a diagnosis for medical release? That would be the subject of my next round of questions.
She has another two and a half minutes coming to her, so she can get it answered then. Before I call on Ms. Blaney, Mr. Shippers, when I interrupted you and on Mr. May's question, you were in the middle of some, I thought, very interesting statistics, which, as far as I know, have not been made available to the committee. So I wonder whether that set of statistics could be tabled with the committee after we're finished, if that's acceptable. Okay?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Madame Blaney, welcome to the committee. We're very nice here, by the way.
Well, it's very good to be here, Chair. And I want to thank the witnesses so much for their important testimony today. I'm going to come to Colonel Jardine first. It's very good to see you. In 2021, your office published an investigative report titled Peer Support for Veterans Who Have Experienced Military Sexual Trauma. You found that there is a gap in access to peer support for veterans and MST survivors. You recommended the government provide a funded peer support program that meets the needs of veterans who have experienced MST and published the GBA Plus for the establishment of the program. I'm wondering if you could update the community on the progress that has been made with this recommendation.
Thank you for the chair. It's lovely to see you again as well. We know, so first of all, our recommendations were accepted, and we understand that that a program has been in development and is in progress of being implemented. I don't know exactly where they are, but I understand it's in implementation. With respect to the GBA Plus, this is something that we ask for almost in every report that we do, every recommendation that we make, and we have yet to see those.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to come back to Mr. Lick. It's very interesting. I saw that you talked about service attribution being decided through legal mechanisms, incentivizes rejection, and leads to members falling through the cracks. And that really concerns me, because I think when you look at the system between the CAF and VAC, we're seeing too many people fall through the cracks. And for Canada to ask people to provide service to us in that profound way, to let them fall through the cracks, I think is a significant failure that we should all be responsible for and all take action on. So in 2016, your predecessor published a report titled Determining Service Attribution for Medically Releasing Members. That recommendation was rejected by the then Minister of National Defence. I'm just wondering if you can speak to why service attribution needs to be as close to the injury or illness as possible and the principles behind this recommendation.
Yes, certainly the recommendation we still strongly believe in, absolutely, as I've already talked about. I think for me it just makes sort of common sense that the people who have the best knowledge of the working environment in which you're working and possibly in this case getting injured, whether that's a mental injury or whether it's a physical injury, they are best able to determine, I think, and this came from a number of people within the department too as well, that they are best able to determine that the injury that occurred, mental or physical, did occur as a result of that work environment. It doesn't mean that one of the issues raised that was the reason why it was rejected was the ethical issue of the treating doctor doing the service attribution at the same time. That's an issue of process. That can be resolved within the organization. But a person or a medical professional who has the knowledge of the work environment is best able, I think. It just makes common sense, I think. I can't say it any other way. In that regard, though, and in fact, it allows then the service attribution to be done quicker. Giving it over, transferring files, lots of documentation back and forth over to VAC, then to make an adjudication, that slows the process down. And what we want to ensure is that the services and benefits and supports that those people need are in place as soon as that injury occurs. And so for people that are transitioning, they need those services and supports as quickly as possible. And that service attribution piece, if we can do it quicker, that'll be good for the people that are transitioning so that they don't fall through the cracks. I will say, though, that one of the things we will do, if people come to us as they're transitioning, where there are medical issues, we will intervene sooner. And when we do intervene, we get tremendous cooperation from the CAF. A lot of times those transitions are stopped, and we make sure that everything that can be done is done before they are released. So in actual fact, when we intervene on a medical issue, we get tremendous cooperation from CAF on that regard.
So my next question is to both of you. I know that both of your offices have called for legislation to instate independent ombuds offices that report directly to Parliament and have expanded investigative powers. When it comes to resolving the deeper issues in health services, transition, and benefits, how could this legislation protect CAF members and veterans? I'll start with you, Mr. Lick.
Yes, I've talked about this quite often, and so does my predecessor, and so does every one of the predecessors before me too as well. I always ask, okay, why is it going to be greener on the other side of the fence, type of thing? And in that regard, I have three main issues. One is that I feel that we can serve our constituents better. In that regard, it provides more accountability for Parliament and oversight for Parliament over a military institution. I think that's a good thing. And in that regard, that's what Parliament is all about, to provide oversight over in this case, the military and all of the forces. But the main one that I sort of see as the greatest benefit is compelling the department to respond in a timely manner and holding them accountable for the recommendations that we make. And that is the one area, as I've said lately, that over the last number of years since I've started, we're seeing the responses be slower and slower. Yes, they may have been accepted in the end, but we're sort of left to see, well, are they going to accept them or not? And what are they going to do about them? In fact, the department actually works on it very quickly. But we're seeing slower and slower responses, and that's not a good thing for Parliament.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Colleagues, we've got 25 minutes worth of questions and a little more than 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to chop everybody's time by a minute. With that, Mr. Kelly, 4 minutes.
Thank you. So it is extraordinarily frustrating when questions are asked, answers are provided through recommendations, and then recommendations are ignored. And I feel like we're asking the questions that have been answered already in reports to Parliament. But you spoke of, actually referred to health care for families of serving members as a matter of national security. And I think that was well put, and we are in a crisis of recruitment, and this is a factor in retaining personnel. So one of the recommendations that was made to Parliament in the Veterans Affairs Report of 2017 was that the Canadian Armed Forces further integrate family members into their mental health and suicide prevention programs. Has that happened with the Canadian Forces?
In some aspects, yes. So the military and the Canadian Armed Forces is working very hard to ensure that family members, as they are required to support a member going through a crisis. That's done through various people and various staff within the military family resource centers. Spouses or partners are also encouraged to attend different mental health sessions with the members. And so there are elements of that particular recommendations that are being pursued. Okay. Absolutely.
Mr. Shippers in 2021 had said that adolescent military dependents are far more likely to have admissions for injury, suicide attempts, and mental health diagnosis than non-military teens. Has there been progress in the last 2 years since that statement was made in reducing those numbers through access to supports and mental health?
Yeah. And I think, as I referred, the military family resource centers are really the avenue in many ways to be able to access some of those supports. Many of the MFRCs are putting in place various supports, whether that's a counselor, a teen counselor, various activities for teens to try and help support them through those mental health issues that they may be experiencing as a result of being a military family member. Does more need to be done? Absolutely. And this is where I come back to, I strongly believe that military family resource centers do need greater funding to be able to support military families better.
Okay, I'll let Mr. Shippers, it was his observation then to maybe comment on progress or where we are since that observation was made.
Mr. Chairman, those stats are from independent research, so I don't have an updated statistic on that. I would say that VAC has expanded. It's colored a little bit outside the lines in terms of expanding its mental health program to include more family members in terms of but there are limited sessions to those. And I think one of the key things is that there's a lot of military life leads to a lot of separation, divorce. And so you have a lot of families that are split where the veteran, it's all connected to the veteran right now. So it's about getting those services in the family member's own right. So the child of a divorced veteran may have a very difficult time accessing mental health care in their own right, and they're at the most vulnerable level. They don't have the financial means to access these things, unlike someone who's employed.
You have just 4 seconds. Mr. Zuberi. welcome to the committee. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I liked what you said, Colonel Jardine, around that once you go through basic, that you are forever impacted and touched. And just to share with the witnesses, I myself was a reservist for 5 years between 97 and 2002, quite a while ago. And the times that I spent in the reserves did continue to impact me and influence me till today. For example, each and every morning I iron my shirts, and I think of the time that I spent ironing shirts in basic and infantry, trying to make sure every wrinkle was removed, starching it, etc. And till today, I'm still running from point A to point B. Not running, jogging from point A to point B. I did so to get to this meeting this morning. So that being said, and the fact that people are forever impacted by their time in the military, I think it's excellent what you're doing, the work that you're doing. I want to pick up on a line of questioning that we had earlier, and I think they're really interesting stats, and we've all commented on the stats that were coming out in terms of that women in the military are 2 to 3 times higher when it comes to suicide than male counterparts who have served. That when it comes to men, that it's 40% higher for men than the average within the population, and other stats of the like are really, really important. That question, that evidence came out because of an acknowledgement that the military historically, traditionally, has been a male-dominated institution. And also the culture of the military is one where you are basically working for a really serious job, which is to enter combat, essentially. That's what the military is about. It's a high-pressure environment, and rightfully so. But you need to also take care of your employees and to ensure that that people are well taken care of. My question on the stats is how do you close the gap between what was mentioned, what we're hearing, and where we want to go in terms of the differences? We've identified some problems, and we know where we want to go. How do you close that gap? How have you been closing that gap?
Well, to be honest, I think
So
the answer... Oh, go ahead, Dishka.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. So in my role as the Veterans Ombud, I can only observe. I can only observe and offer recommendations to the minister. The gap that exists, or the impact on women as opposed to men or other equity-seeking groups with service in the Canadian Forces is real, and we see it. We see the impacts of that. What my office has been calling for is more research into the why. We don't know why. Without why, we can't address the root causes. So it's a joint effort between the Canadian Forces and Veterans Affairs Canada, I believe. But I've been calling for research, and I believe that is the key piece that is necessary to do now, and so that we understand why these things are happening, and then things can be put in place to correct those, so that when you serve, you don't necessarily come out the other end with illness or injuries, simply because the equipment doesn't fit you, or various other reasons.
Madame Normandine, a minute and a half, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to repeat my question. Colonel Jordan, you mentioned that those who leave for medical reasons, who are released for medical reasons, have good follow-up, but those who leave voluntarily have to find their own resources. So in terms of mental health, do you know that if there are members, service people who left voluntarily but should have received medical release? Do you see situations like that?
I'll answer in English, please. Excuse me, it's harder through the by video. I am not certain that mental health, VAC has put in place a program where now if you put in a disability claim for mental health, not all mental health conditions, but but some, you're eligible for treatment right away. So when I'm out there, I encourage people, when I'm meeting with veterans, I encourage people to submit disability claims if they feel that they need to. I'm asking actually the government to go a step further and provide treatment on receiving a disability claim for all conditions, not just mental health. Maybe I'll leave it there and allow time for Mr. Lick.
Unfortunately, Mr. Lick doesn't have any time. Minute and a half, Madame Blaney.
So I have another question for both of you. I know that yesterday, I'm just trying to get some clarity. Yesterday, Minister Anand announced the launch of the Independent Legal Assistance Program, offering some legal funding for survivors through the Sexual Misconduct Support and Resource Center. If survivors have a dispute around the eligibility for the Legal Assistance Fund, do we know which of your offices they would actually turn to?
Well, we generally don't deal directly with legal matters like that in essence, but what our job is, it would be both, I believe both the OVO and my job is to make sure we refer the people to the right place to get that support in this particular case. So our intake team will be, as a result of the announcement, will be informed and have the information necessary so that if people do call us, we will refer them to the right place, as we already do for many of those types of things.
Exactly the same answer.
Okay, thank you. My last question very quickly is around the fact that the harm to serving military family members is, you said, it's like it's a concern for national security. I'm just wondering if you could explain a little bit about what you mean by that.
Well, I come back to, it's quite simple for me. Military families are, as we've always said, are the backbone of the military member. They provide the support. They provide the support during a deployment. They take care of the dependents while the member is serving, maybe deployed overseas. It's much easier, as you will all know, if your family is well taken care of, you can do your work. And if the military member is always having to worry about what's happening back home, are my children being taken care of? Do they have the childcare necessary? Do they have the medication? Do they have a doctor that they can access to be able to get the support they need? If they're continually worrying about that, they're not being able to concentrate on their job, which is taking care of us around this table.
Thank you, Madame Blaney. Mr. Bazan. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both offices for your incredible work that you do on behalf of those that are serving and those that have served, and holding up their values and standing up for their rights and the sacrifices that they made for Canada. Now, one of the things that, Mr. Lick, that you said that I'm struggling with here, and you talked about this as a process problem, not a people problem. And yet you said that it's the defense medical team that is, there's an ethical issue here on them attributing what benefits they have for injury from service. So it's ethical for the defense medical team to determine that injury. It's ethical for that defense medical team to say that you don't meet the universality of service. It's ethical for that defense medical team to say that you're going to be discharged and be leaving the service and transfer you over to VAC. So how the hell is it not ethical to also say that injury gets this benefit from Veterans Affairs Canada? Where's the process problem?
That's exactly the question that I'm asking.
So it comes down to Colonel Jardine. Then what is happening at VAC that they will not accept that? Or is it CAF pushing back that they don't want to take on that responsibility?
Well, in the original instance when we made that recommendation, it definitely was our department, National Defense, and the CAF pushing back on that particular issue. And the explanation that was given to me was that this was an ethical issue of a treating doctor at the same time saying, for insurance reasons or benefit reasons, that your injury is due to service. I kind of think that's just a poor reason in this regard. Yeah, it's not a bad word for it, actually. And so we continue to make that recommendation. In fact, for primary reservists now, the CAF does this. does service attribution for primary reservists. So why not for all the regular force? In fact, for certain conditions a little bit later on, as a result of some of the changes in SISUP, that will have to occur as well for even for regular force members. So I think we're moving along the path to get to the point of this. It may require a different process within the CAF so that
What is that recommendation that we need to make at this committee in this report to make that happen?
the same recommendation as we put in our report.
And is that true also over on the Veterans Affairs side, Colonel Nishka?
Thank you for the question. I understand that the CAF doctors have offered a reason why they don't make attribution to service. I would ask the committee to ask Veterans Affairs Canada how many claims are denied because of attribution to service. In other words, they are unable to draw the link between service and the illness or injury. I would ask the committee to ask Veterans Affairs Canada that question. I think I think it's an interesting question to ask. What I understand is that it is currently Veterans Affairs Canada who makes the attribution to service. It's what they've always done. They have access to service health records. That access has been simplified. So what I tell people when I'm out on the road, when I meet with military members and with veterans, I tell them of the importance of making that a connection to service, that their illness and injury, when they submit their disability claim, they should always get advice on how to do that. I've said repeatedly that the veteran services officers in the Legion are trained to help people to do that, making that connection to service in the disability claim, them, drawing that connection themselves in their own words, telling their story, and then when VAC accesses their service health records, they can make that connection as well. A lot of work has been done by the department to better understand the conditions of service on every single trade and occupation in the Canadian Forces.
We're going to have to
Mr. Lick
leave.
is asking for is...
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there, Mr. Bazan. Final 4 minutes to Mrs. Zuberi.
So I was wanting to touch base on the practices that we have in Canada and looking to allies, other militaries that are similar to the Canadian military, and to see the spectrum of treatments they have, prevention, transition to a post-service life, the best practices that these other militaries that are comparable to Canada. Do you have any positive examples that are out there that we can emulate and implement here within Canada?
Well, I mean, certainly the United States has a very different approach to how it serves veterans after their service. In this case, they have veterans hospitals. They continue their treatment with very experienced military or experienced military doctors or doctors who have military experience. I think that in general is a good thing. It's a good question, I would say, for medical professionals rather than myself. But certainly there are lots of areas or lots of countries out there that do it differently. Are they better? It's kind of hard to say, but there's also a resource issue that goes along with that, right? And it also a legal issue of jurisdiction over civilians too as well. So there are legal issues that go along with it. Are there better examples out there? Likely. I always go back to the United States, but it is a very different process down there for dealing with veterans' medical issues. Is it better? I would probably say yes, but.
So I'm curious, it's been a long time. I mentioned 20 years since I was in the military, and back in the day, we used to get something called SHARP training, which was once a year we'd get this diversity harassment sort of refresher. And we've talked a lot about the services that are available to people who are serving and those when they clear out. Is that information being shared in the same way how diversity training was done back then? Are there seminars given on an annual basis in terms of the services, the suite of services that are available to personnel?
That's a very broad question. If we're just focusing on the issues that we learned, and likely Colonel Jardine learned too as well during SHARP training, which was the first sort of seminar approach that was taken after Somalia. In our regards, I took it to as well. That has changed dramatically since then into something which I think is much better. But at the same time, your question is talking about all the services and supports. And one of the things that we note is the better informed a military member, a military family member is about the services and supports that they need and require at different times in their lives, the better.
Certainly.
And so that would be an area that if we can focus on, one thing that's relatively simple to do, get more information out there and more efficient information out there that gets people knowledge.
Certainly, in 40 seconds I have left. The reason why I asked that is because I was a non-commissioned member, and many who are testifying, who are in the visioning, were officers. And officers get this sort of training continuously, but rank and file, privates, corporals, and others, they're not as well informed, and nor do they necessarily get the information in the same way as officers do. So I'm wondering, the reason why I highlight that type of training, because it was forced and annual. Do service people get a similar sort of suite of information that's forced and annual as there was for the SHARP training of the past?
Different areas, yes, but your question is quite broad, and for all the services and supports, that probably not. And I think what we're finding, what you'll see in our report on mental health for primary reservists, you'll see that there's an information or awareness gap there that needs to be addressed too as well. So the answer generally is no. Not all the information is shared in the best way. In certain areas, yes. Suicide prevention, those things should be done on an annual basis, absolutely. And I would say they are being done better than when you and I, or maybe even Colonel Jardine, took it years ago.
Mr. Zabari, and unfortunately I'm going to have to draw this meeting to a close. I offer an insincere apology for cutting each and every one of you off, but as you can see, the time is our enemy. With that, again, thank you for your informative dialogue with the committee, and hopefully we'll start to move the yardstick a little bit forward. So with that, meeting is suspended while we read battle. A number of minutes off the clock. I'm not going to go through any formal introduction, but simply ask Senator Rebecca Patterson for her first 5 minutes, and then Dr. Karen Brecht for her 5 minutes, and then Mr. Booth, who's online, for his 5 minutes. I'm given to understand that, Mr. Booth, you have a hard stop at 10:45, so we'll try to respect that. Senator Patterson.
So good morning, and honorable members and colleagues. So thank you for the invitation to appear today as part of your study on military health system and the provision of health and transition services under the Canadian Forces Health Services Group. I didn't add veterans there, I kept serving. As the chair mentioned, I am a senator, but I'm also a veteran, having recently just retired from the Canadian Armed Forces as a Rear Admiral. I'm also a service spouse, I'm a mother of 2, and I'm also a military mom because my son is a Reserve Force member. I enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1989 as a nursing officer. During my 34 years with the military, I've been posted across Canada and deployed overseas to Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Afghanistan. And I've served as a commander of One Health Services Group in Edmonton, covering the west and north of Canada from a health perspective, deputy commanding officer of the Canadian Forces Health Services Group, and ultimately as the commander, or in effect, the CEO, COO of health services within the Canadian Armed Forces. I continue to be a member of the College of Nurses of Ontario, the Canadian College of Health Leaders, and the Royal Canadian Medical Services Association. Suffice to say, I have quite a bit of experience in the domain that we're about to discuss today. The military healthcare system is not like the sort that most Canadians are familiar with. So unlike provincial and territorial healthcare systems, the military system provides a spectrum of occupational health services in Canada. This includes medical, dental, pharma, mental and physical health across Canada and around the world. However, it's also responsible for medical and dental procurement of material and equipment, research and development, logistics and recruitment, retention and training of military health human resources. International operational health services support involves a high degree of interoperability with our allies and within multinational alliances like NATO and ABCA. The Canadian Forces Health Services Group is, in essence, Canada's 14th health jurisdiction because serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces are excluded under the Canada Health Act. Despite paying provincial taxes like any other resident, CAF members are not issued provincial health cards and cannot access health care delivery via their respective provincial health care systems. Instead, CAF members receive health services through military health care facilities and not via a local provider in their community. Health services that are not provided by the military are sourced through the provincial health care system or through private medical and dental facilities. The CAF must purchase those health services for its members from providers, often at exaggerated rates, just like non-Canadians. Despite what you've heard, funding for the healthcare system, which includes everything I previously mentioned, is a concern. As recently as 2018, an internal evaluation of military healthcare found that the period between 2010-11 and 2016-17, so pre-COVID, healthcare spending in Canada generally rose at an average rate of 3.3% per year. In other words, greater than the national inflation rate, whereas within the Canadian Forces, it was only funded at 0.7%. This demonstrates the diminished buying power within the CAF relative to the health care that they are expected to provide. Please excuse me. Paper, printers, not good. As I've mentioned, the CAF often purchases services for its members at higher rates despite having less to spend on health care. This is where the Minister of Defence, with their respective colleagues in Health and Intergovernmental Affairs, can emerge as a champion for health care of CAF members by working with provincial governments to negotiate better rates more closely aligned with those charged within the provincial healthcare systems, if not the same rate. But colleagues, and I use the term colleagues because we are fellow parliamentarians, funding isn't the only issue. There are structural issues related to service delivery and to human health resource side of healthcare provision in the military. Health service personnel in the CAF are fully trained sailors, soldiers, and aviators in addition to being healthcare providers. You can appreciate that there is no other career quite like it. You've talked about retention, salary, quality of life are often higher outside the military for healthcare providers, and we're posted all over the world on a regular basis, and it's extremely hard to maintain required clinical competencies. And there's a mental and physical toll. While the CAF is not a licensor or regulator of health professionals, there's an opportunity for the CAF to lead on either a federal regulatory approval system or greater interprovincial recognition of licensing, in other words, portability. As I mentioned, military health care is unlike provincial medical or dental care systems. Given resource challenges within CFHS, both human and financial, coupled with urgent need to recruit new and more diverse CAF members in general, policy changes that have led to the retention of members for longer with more complex health requirements, is critical that we think healthcare in the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Senator Patterson. Dr. Breck, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. The current approach to military healthcare and transition is much more person-centered, trauma-informed than when I, as a medical officer, was released in 2009. Despite significant improvements made over the last decade, there is always room for more improvements, especially for ensuring the health and well-being of military women. Ideally, women's health issues will become normalized, expected, fully integrated parts of the future military medical system. We should all be able to talk about and care for menstrual bleeding suppression, perinatal mental health, urinary incontinence, menopause, with as much ease as we talk about a sprained ankle. Thanks to the ongoing political will and targeted funding from Budget 2022, a military women's health strategy is now underway. However, one area in particular, military women's reproductive health, will require a multi-department collaborative approach. Many military and veteran women are challenged to get pregnant, stay healthy during and after their pregnancies, and have healthy offspring. I have followed the medical journeys of hundreds, if not thousands, of military and veteran women. In my opinion, reproductive loss and its complications are often more soul-crushing, life-altering for women than any other form of trauma the military has to offer them. Although reproductive challenges are possible for anyone at any time, the question that tortures those so impacted is the unknowns around what role the military workplace played, if any, in their individual cases. Most reproductive military hazard research is still only available on men. Yet men make new sperm every 90 days, while women reproduce with the eggs they were born with. The potential reproductive health impacts from military-specific workplace exposures to chemicals, extreme temperatures, pressures, vibrations, sound, radiation, traumas are simply not the same for men and women. It is critical that the risks and effects of non-traditional workplace exposures is better understood for women. Military women usually love their work and are happy to continue working for as long as they can while pregnant. However, when there are complications, it is often only then, in retrospect, that these same women and their healthcare providers start to research deeper and understand just how little is actually known in this area. The outcome for many of the so impacted military women is a living purgatory of self-blaming guilt about what-ifs. Society at large aggravates this topic as reproductive loss and its complications are still largely viewed as a taboo topic to discuss in public settings. The internalized, rarely vocalized emotions often manifest into health-related conditions that can accelerate some of these women's release from the military. Women sign up to the military prepared to give their lives if so required. What military women are not prepared for is to lose their individual potential to create healthy life because their employer has not yet seen it fit to conduct the needed research for women's full and meaningful inclusion into federal workspaces. The Minister of National Defence's mandate letter already directs her to ensure resources are available for military women's health. However, the type of foundational occupational research required here cannot be done by CAF alone, nor should it. Workplace reproductive hazards are not unique to military women. Women in many of the operational new roles in the federal government, including RCMP, Coast Guard, Corrections, Border Services, Transport Canada, and even the Canadian Space Agency, all need more knowledge on how to better enable and support women in non-traditional workspaces. I challenge the committee members to think big picture. The Minister of National Defence could, on behalf of military women, help develop a strategic plan for the occupational health needs of all federally employed women. Together, Canada could become the world leader in enabling and supporting the health and well-being of women wishing to work in non-traditional workspaces throughout their life cycle. If not Canada, who? And if not now, when? Thank you.
Right. Finally, Mr. Booth. 5 minutes, please. You're on mute, Mr. Booth.
Apologies.
There we are.
Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to contribute to this important piece of work. True Patriot Love is Canada's national foundation for the military and veteran community, and we work closely as a trusted partner with the Canadian Armed Forces, Veterans Affairs, and the federal and provincial governments. It would be remiss of me not to take this opportunity to thank the government for its tremendous support of the 2025 Invictus Games, for which True Patriot Love was honoured to be able to coordinate the successful bid on behalf of Canada. And we look forward to welcoming the world to Vancouver and Whistler for the first ever winter edition of this inspiring event. The committee may also like to note that we have made both supporting transition and the mental health of military and veteran families as key legacy strands for the Games. As the National Foundation, True Patriot Love works across the spectrum of issues facing our service members and veterans. We support our military families and children, especially as they navigate the issues of multiple deployments or location away from their home community, and provide significant support through the Military Family Resource Centres and other local partners. We fund a range of programs to assist the health and well-being of both serving members and veterans, including mental health, homelessness, and employment and transition support. For those that may have become injured or ill, we contribute to their recovery and rehabilitation through sport, expeditions, and the creative arts. And we help with the reintroduction back into local communities post-uniform, often a challenge after long periods away. We're pleased that the committee is reviewing this subject. Our service members deserve the best support while in uniform as they transition and post-release. We know that many struggle through both illness and injury, and also with the change in their status, access to support systems, and the lack of a sense of purpose once they release. An estimated 10,000 military families are required to relocate each year, of which approximately 8,000 must move to a new province or territory. Approximately 2/3 of families experience periods of absence from their loved ones due to operational requirements. In a recent survey of Canadian Armed Forces spouses, 24% found childcare extremely difficult to re-establish after a relocation. The nature of military life also makes healthcare more challenging, especially for families. There can be multiple moves and a lack of family doctors in local communities. Military families may experience an unfamiliarity with civilian organizations and have little time to navigate this before moving on again. I recently spoke to a military mother who said she'd spent the whole of her child's formative years with her fingers crossed. This can have a corresponding impact on mental health, which may in turn be a challenge both in accessing support, but also bring the associated stigma or fear of losing duties or status. Serving members may seek mental health care off base so that their chain of command is not aware and it does not impact their career. This situation is not new nor unique to Canada. However, it has been made more challenging through the COVID-19 pandemic, with many programs either being cancelled or switched to digital delivery. While this can have some positive implications, especially as we try and provide services to a geographically dispersed Canadian Armed Forces and veteran community, people suffering from service-related mental health conditions may simply not be able to take advantage of virtual services, and we should seek, where we can, to ensure in-person provision is available, and these are reopened where they still remain closed as soon as practicable. However, technology can also offer opportunities. In 2019, True Patriot Love received funding from the Veterans Affairs Wellbeing Fund to explore how innovative technology can benefit veteran mental health. And in particular, we stood up an expert advisory council that has been focused on how to allow better access to a serving member or veteran's own health records. Following a 2-year study involving veteran focus groups, the technology sector and representatives of Veterans Affairs and Canadian Forces Health Services, we're developing a proposal for a veteran health record digital safe. As the committee may be aware, traditionally these records have been provided either in paper form, often long and cumbersome, or in a technological format such as a disk or memory stick, which is outdated and often not usable. This digital repository would be far more portable and user-friendly and would allow veterans to grant permission to access medical records to authorized healthcare service providers. And secondly, we've proposed a feasibility study to test the electronic transfer of medical records for healthcare clinician use. This also would have the advantage of preventing veterans having to repeat their story on numerous occasions, something we've heard can be very challenging and potentially triggering. Thirdly, the system could provide a repository of anonymized information to allow researchers to have better understanding of the issues and prevalence. We hope the Veterans Affairs will grant permission for a feasibility study shortly. I would also flag 2 other matters for the committee in brief. Firstly, as they will be aware, the government is developing a new national employment strategy for veterans, and I would encourage the 2 studies to align, as mental health challenges for our veterans can not only be combat or service injury related, but also drawn from the stress, anxiety, or depression following release.
Could you come to your conclusion, please? Thank you.
Yep. We're working with the Government of Ontario on a major pilot to strengthen former service members into the healthcare sector and the private sector, mirroring the UK's Step Into Health programme. To conclude, to ensure that military members and their families can remain in service for the optimal time and complete a positive and healthy transition to civilian life, we would hope the government both promotes the comprehensive provision of care to our military community, but also recognises the value of community supports that may often provide essential services and offer choice to a veteran service member or veteran, should they service member or veteran from a more formal Canadian Armed Forces or government program, should they wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Colleagues, we have 35 minutes left. And so I will get through the first round if I cut it back at least a minute on everybody, and then we'll see where we go for the second round. So 5 minutes, Mr. Bazan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all our witnesses, and particularly I want to thank Dr. Breck and Senator Patterson for your service to Canada as part of our defence medical teams. Senator Patterson, you talked about how things are paid for in the Canadian Armed Forces healthcare. So, you know, we have universality service that all our troops have to meet, but yet they don't meet universal healthcare. So I'm just wondering, should part of the Canada Health transfer be paid to the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, or should the provincial health agencies quit charging our troops when they have to visit a provincial health facility?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is actually a really pressing question because taxpayers actually want to make sure that their money is being used correctly. So I'm going to take this in two steps. The first step I'm going to talk about is how the CAF pays, or Department of Defense pays for health services. We have arrangements right now with each province, which are locally negotiated. Now, as we are excluded from the Canada Health Act, there are times it comes into three buckets. There are an employer health tax, which is sort of a health transfer that affects a few provinces, expect that from the Canadian Armed Forces. You then have services for hospital-type fees, which can be even $89 to step inside the door, as well as amplified service fees for using facilities. And then we have individual physicians providing care, which, as we all know, are negotiated with the provinces through their respective provincial organizations, associations. So I think the first thing that we need to do as part of the overall health transfer negotiations that are being open with the provinces is that the federal government runs a healthcare system, is what we're trying to say, the deliverers of care. And we need to have a seat at the table with those negotiations to deal with those rates. In terms of a component of the healthcare transfer, especially potentially the one-time component, I think that is definitely worth consideration. What is going to be quite important, again, is to understand that while healthcare is funded in the military, it is from a fixed budget within the whole Defense Department. And if there isn't enough as a baseline funding within healthcare, it comes from something else within the department. We know that the Canadian Armed Forces needs more funding to do what they're doing, gas for tanks, healthcare. And that's an oversimplification, but yes, thank you.
I appreciate that. One of the things that we haven't dived into yet is that our current defense team, of course, is treating our forces that are on training, on exercises, but not necessarily being exposed to a traumatic injury like we experienced when we're in theater, like in Afghanistan. So how do we maintain that skill set within our defense team, and how do we deal with surge capabilities in case, when we are deployed and in a hot conflict, where do we find that personnel that are out there? I know reservists could play a part in that, and I just wanted to get both your experience on that side of it.
Yeah, so if you like, I'll start and we can go from that point on. So when we're talking about surge capability, the one way that the health human resource component of the Canadian Armed Forces Health Services is structured is you have a military-civilian mix of teams, meaning the backbone was always intended to be civilian care providers, allowing uniformed personnel to maintain their clinical competencies. Oh, and that costs money, by the way, that eats into that budget I was just talking about. So that is fine, but the challenges in that space right now is that there's been complaints about contracting within in the department. But if you cannot employ a healthcare provider through the public service because the salaries themselves are too low, there is no other choice, because to go without care means you don't have people ready for deployment. May I add, one of my recommendations is going to be to you is that there is an urgent requirement for the public service to go through and review salaries of clinicians within the public service framework. This benefits more departments than the Canadian Armed Forces, but the rates have to be competitive. This will then allow more military people to be able to surge forward and go elsewhere. I might be out of time, and may I ask you to...
30 seconds.
30 seconds. So, Dr. Breck, actually, I just want to switch over to your specialty in women's reproductive health. You're talking about that we don't have enough research here in Canada. Do any of our other allies have research that we can use as a baseline to start this discussion on how we protect women's reproductive health?
It's an extremely complicated area, and it's newer technology even required to understand the baselines. And so again, I do appreciate, especially for the unusual military environmental exposures, our best bet is to work with our allies together to start gathering the data together so we have the higher numbers of women that we can start documenting and moving forward on. So people look to Canada as leaders in this area, which is why we've got more to do.
Mr. Brazan. Yeah. Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. I want to go to you first, Senator. End of Nurses Week. Happy Nurses Week, and thank you for your incredible service. You had the understatement, perhaps, of the day when you said, "I have quite a bit of experience." I would say that's quite the understatement based on your resume. So thank you for your service. Now, you gave Mr. Bazan one of your recommendations. I'm interested in all of your recommendations, and I feel like I want to take away as much of my preamble as possible and give you the floor. But can you speak from your own personal experience and tell us, what we should be doing based on your experiences?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to approach this from our level as fellow parliamentarians. So if I'm going to break it down into buckets, and the first bucket is how we fund, because when you fund healthcare, you fund defense, which is key, which is why my first recommendation is, while people may say, $10 million here, $10 million there, it doesn't matter. It matters a lot. So my first recommendation is very much the biggest budget chunk is out of how we provide health care and we purchase from the civilian sector. And I use the term purchase very deliberately. So my first recommendation is, as part of the intergovernmental arrangements with provinces, is that federal health care very specifically is in there and is negotiated along with the transfer taxes, because the federal government delivers health care as well as pays for it. So that is my first recommendation. The second one that comes out of there, as I pull my little sheets up because of my age, we're looking at things such as looking at an urgent replacement funding-wise to replace the health records that Mr. Booth very clearly talked about. We have a Frankenstein system that was one of the first medical health records in Canada that needs replacing. There's no more bolt-ons that are capable. It is a patient safety issue not to invest about $500 million in replacing this electronic system. If we do this now, because process takes time, from an information passage, you will be able to address everything from patient safety for serving members, no matter wherever they serve, but move them through to transition so there is a seamless transfer of records between the civilian sector, military, and into Veterans Affairs. So that is another recommendation I have, and I'm trying to go faster, Mr. Chair, for you. And the other thing that we're having a look in is investing in infrastructure. It is a challenge throughout the department, but I'm going to use CMed, of which one of our honourable members here can really appreciate. That's the Central Medical Equipment Depot in Petawawa. It is an ancient building. The pandemic has shown us that multi-departmental relationships for unique medical procurement storage requires a national solution and investment, and it's important, but can't get it across the start line. Invest in infrastructure within healthcare. Do I still have time, Mr. Chair? Okay. Oh, I can get through them, I promise. The next area is health human resources. This is a pan-Canadian healthcare issue, and this is very, very timely. If I focused very tightly into the Canadian Armed Forces, we are in direct competition with other sectors in the Canadian public to not only find people who wish to wear uniforms, but also to find public servants or even contractors to do that. In order to make it a career of choice, we can deal with the military side in a minute, but I strongly recommend that some impetus be put behind the public service to do a review of all the occupations within the public service that deliver direct clinical care, to make sure that salaries and benefits are competitive. Please keep in mind that whether I be military, RCMP, CBSA, you name it, I probably don't serve in a major centre. It is a small and remote area of Canada, and we need bilingualism. The next area is we look at federal health capacity. Sorry, I can get it all in here. I used to own the official languages portfolio. The federal health capacity, when it looks at everything from daycare to healthcare, I think we need to think differently about it, of which the Canadian Armed Forces can benefit, looking at a federal health system that looks like something like the public healthcare system down in the U.S., where you have licensor and federally regulated care providers at a national level. So they become tools of the federal level beyond the provincial jurisdictions to very closely target care. So whether it be healthcare for the military and the RCMP perhaps, to daycare, things that have become the barriers we meet all along. So we need to be very progressive in looking at federally regulated, certified, transferable this is what we need to have a look at to determine, is there a better way of doing business? And I do believe there is some work ongoing in other departments. C'est tout. Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher has a brilliant question, Mr. Fisher. Yes. Yeah. Madame Normandine, 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all witnesses, especially thank you, Dr. Brick and Senator Patterson. My question will be to the two of you in two parts. First, I want to know if the armed forces are really taking into account female morphology when they are acquiring materials. I know that it can generate medical issues as well. So I also want to hear about disparities in medical treatments when there's deployments. When women are deployed, do they receive the adequate treatments?
Do you want to start?
Thank you for your important question. I think the Canadian Armed Forces has come a long way with the help of gender-based analysis of doing the right thing moving forward for new procurements. Of course, a lot of the equipment in the military is old, though, and so all of the older issues. So looking at how submarines accommodations and different kind of accommodations on different ships. The newer ships are already taking things into account, but we still have a lot of older equipment. So that's one problem. I do think we've done amazing work at places like DRDC Toronto for looking at different equipment pieces. That's still in evolution. We're still learning of how to do it, but a lot of that is moving forward. So for me, the area that is still the most interesting is deployment. For me, there's 3 totally different types of medicine. There's the primary care, I'm your family doctor, normal medicine. And then there's the occupational medicine of you are employed and I am the company doctor, and how can I maximize that you can work for me for 30 years? And then there's the deployment medicine where I know you might be hurting yourself and I'm actually sending you out still and knowing you might hurt yourself. It's a very different type of medicine. So when we're deployed, many different ways that can be. It isn't just Army. I came mostly Air Force, so every time wheels are up, we're deployed. There's many different ways deployment can happen, but we're often isolated by ourselves and we have to figure out how to do things. If we look at something like a UN mission and start thinking on that women, peace and security lens, we are not necessarily with other Canadian resources or assets, but we're hoping for that equivalent. But it's often quite hard to have that kind of equivalency for some of our UN missions. We, to my knowledge, don't have minimum medical standards of women's health training for the UN level help. And often we'll say, oh, there's a US base nearby. So we're good. But especially on women's health issues, and especially even more so lately, there's still a lot of different treatments and resources that might not be available in a US location that would be in Canada. We often still don't have basics in some of the UN kit. So things like birth control pills or after a sexual assault, the kind of medications that would be needed, or vaginal infection information, or even just a speculum, the instruments to be able to properly examine in a woman's vagina, that may not be available at that first stage. So suddenly something that really should be pretty simple to take care of becomes a big to-do. You have to leave the mission. And especially if you're in a conflict zone, even leaving the mission is actually quite dangerous. You're actually taking yourself out, and it could be a 2 or 3 day thing. At one stage, I was in Germany, and we would have women still having to come up from Afghanistan to Germany to get care that really was kind of primary medical care that could have been ideally dealt with already on site if we all had a higher level of awareness of the right products, the right treatments, and how to deal with common women's issues.
I've also realized I cannot hear simultaneous translation and hear you speak French. C'est un grand problème pour moi. Mais I'm going to just build on what Dr. Brick has said. So on the UN side, it is beyond Canada's control because the UN provides the health care. However, what is really important is through groups like the Women, Peace and Security Ambassador, we are trying to influence how women are included, whether it be the ELSI initiative that's within nations, but also feedback that we're giving to the UN. However, it behooves us as part of our planning process to ensure that there is a chain of care or evacuation should it need be. The next thing will go more to preventative and making sure that women have the right health before they go. So with the exception of common episodic illnesses that are feminine in nature, is that they are dealt with. So investing in this women's health program, women's health research, how do we keep women healthy is where we're going.
Thank you, Madame Normandine. Ms. Blaney, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses testifying today, but a special thanks to Dr. Breck and Senator Patterson for your service. I really profoundly appreciate it. Dr. Breck, I'm going to come first to you. We've had CAF officials at this committee, and there was some confusion on whether MST survivors can access OSISS and funded peer support groups. I'm just wondering if you can speak to the significance of peer support programs and how you think the program should be structured.
Thank you for what I think is a really important question. And if I can, it's very complicated. So I'll step back a little bit. What problem are we trying to solve? To me, as a clinician, what have you had as an injury in your workplace? And I almost don't care what it is. You were injured in your workplace, and how can we help and support you? So whether that injury is from combat, whether that injury is from a sexual misconduct, you have an injury that is an occupational injury. We now are calling a lot of these issues moral injuries and occupational stress injury. But the terminology, I think we're still evolving and we're still learning. And it's really, really, really important, I think, that we identify our terminologies clearer because it does cause constantly confusion. So what is an OSI and what an operational stress injury and what is a military sexual trauma? If I asked everyone here, I would guess I will get different answers from every one of you. I had an opportunity before COVID where I had 10 generals in a room, and I actually asked the question to each of those generals, is military sexual trauma an OSI? Yes or no? And everyone had an answer. And I literally had straight down the middle. I had 5 saying, why are you asking me? Of course it is. And I had 5 saying, why are you asking me? Of course it is not. And I think that speaks to how we have problems, especially on the MST side, when we have a number of decision makers assume that it's always included when we hear the words OSI, and yet we have senior decision makers that assume that it has nothing to do with it. And at the end of the day, my humble opinion here, 10 years from now, we won't be using this terminology at all. We'll be focusing on moral injury. We'll be focusing on where and what do you need for help right now versus the hyper-focus on how did you do the injury, focusing instead on the human and how we can help. And I think a lot of these issues, in that day, in that moment, your genetics, your family history, your childhood, your health that day, your meaning because of how that person looked like someone you knew, you got overwhelmed from your trauma. And you had a trauma response. That's all we're talking here. You had a trauma response. And as we understand more now, I think we're finding very rapidly that if we can give you the right resources up front, you may not need medical care at all. You don't need to be medicalized. You don't need to be pathologized. You don't need to be medicationized. You don't need a label. You don't need a diagnosis. You just need someone to say, this is normal. You're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Let me help you. Let me sit with you and tell you it's going to be okay and give you tools and resources. And that's where peer support comes in so important. And then we wouldn't necessarily need to go to VAC because we can't go to VAC until we're already down the line, when we already have a diagnosis, when we already now have major depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. That's when VAC picks up. And yet the majority of people I know aren't there yet. So where do they go for help and support? Peer support, if done holistically for everybody, and if I still, right now it's really a confusing area. Can I go to the operational stress injury clinic if I have military sexual trauma? Oh, of course you can. Okay, so it is an OSI then, because I'm going to the OSI clinic, so it must be an OSI. So I can go to the OSI social support program then, right, for me and my family? Oh, no, I can't. Why? Why can I not? Why do we fit in one place but not the other? And there's a number of layers of confusion, and hence that was a complaint that formally got brought to the Veterans Ombuds, and there is a report on it, and we're still very much in the process of trying to find an equivalency of how to help everybody who has an occupational health injury, not preferentially just one group over the other. For me, we need to help everyone, and peer support is a big part of that.
Thank you, Ms. Blaney. Less than 15 minutes and 25 minutes worth of questions. This is not going to work. 331133, and I'm going to be hard on the 3. So, Mr. Kelly, 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. Senator Patterson, we heard from the CAF Ombudsman earlier about issues around attribution of injury, and then once transitioning into Veterans Affairs, the having to then seek private diagnosis. So if a member has been certified by Canadian Forces medical personnel unfit and unable to meet universality of service, is there any ethical reason which has been raised why that doesn't automatically carry through and enable a veteran to obtain medical appropriate medical support and services?
I think that's a fabulous question, and just to let you know, I'm stuck right in the middle of it personally because I retired in January. I'm trying to figure out the system, and I come from a health background. So just so you know, it isn't the medical services that declares you're not universally fit, it's the CAF itself, and that really is a technicality. So I think it's how we write our policies at a departmental level as to what you're going to accept. And I'm going to tie it back into I'm going to try and give you something useful here, is we have to have the policy, the seamlessness between service and post-service time, where it isn't the member trying to navigate the system, which is what it is now. The whole burden is put on the member. Find this, pull that, give that, dig this up. So what we have to have a look at is not only policy changes that state that if you have someone who has an expertise in military attribution, you did this while you were deployed in Somalia, for example, that it doesn't have to be reproved for at least the initial stages within VAC. So there needs to have a look at, through seamlessness, policy and mandate letters between, I'm going to say departments because that's always a unique space. And then secondly, how about making that health record seamlessly transferable? And while there are some privacy technicalities to go in there, what you shouldn't have to do is have an absolute complete review of everything that's ever happened to you in order to leave the military. Even if you leave without a medical release, it's the same situation. You don't come out of this unscathed, unfortunately. But when it's been attributed, why can that not be the first record that's already in the system, in VAC, that starts the assessment before it is you? Because it is the same questions being asked again and again. So a seamless health record, policy to do it, and as well as mandate, I think would make it easier.
Thank you. Kelly, Ms. O'Connell, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for everyone's testimony. It's been really exceptional. Senator Patterson, thank you. You've done a lot of our work as well. I think in your testimony you'll give us a lot. But with my only 3 minutes, Dr. Breek, if I could, or Breck, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, could one of the problems be that in dealing with women's health is that even in civilian life, the needs of women's health care is still so misunderstood? There's a lack of expertise, again, even in civilian life. The stigma around talking about it, again, even in private life, could be part of the problem. And then a second piece to that is, are there not other industries who maybe have come along further in terms of dealing with kind of the non-traditional, which is still kind of, or even that is a ridiculous term, but the non-traditional work for a woman who might be in a high-intensity job, a physical job in the private sector, where we could build upon reproductive health care and policies that could actually then translate into military life. Obviously, the travel, the intense schedule and things of that nature may not be completely compatible or comparable, but there could be some lessons learned even in private sector. If you could elaborate. Sorry.
I will speak faster. Absolutely, there's a bias we know for across the board on civilian side. And if I can, to me, it's different buckets again. So we already know there's a bias in primary health care. That, of course, comes over into the military health care. But now we have a bias in occupational medicine as well. Most of the original occupational hygiene rules, regulations, all were done in the 1970s, mostly in the U.S., hence why it's almost all on male data. We need an entire revisal of all of those occupational health hazards that include now women, because it just hasn't been done. So that is a government, because it's a government-specific issue for the employment. Add on to that one more layer, and that's the operational level. So for women doing military flying, diving, these kind of very unique to the military, again, that is a government responsibility to be doing research at that level, because it's not the primary care. When we talk about industry, no question, we always can learn from other areas, mining, non-traditional. Again, I'll just highlight all of them, though. When we start talking chemical exposure, vibration, sound, these physical things, that was 1970s since anybody kind of did the major updates. We need a country to step forward to do across the board very major review now that women are coming into these environments of what is and isn't dangerous. And we may find a lot of the issues are not dangerous and it is safe, but right now we don't know. And so it's that initial research of federal government, hopefully, across departments.
Madame Normandine, 1 minute.
Rapidement, very quickly. The services for survivors of military sexual trauma, are they managed in the right places? Are they found in more in the cities rather than in the military bases where we have more members who are victims?
Yeah, I can give you a direction on where to go for that information. It has been part of the overall work on sexual misconduct since 2018. So it's about concentration of serving members, and that's sort of where the services are concentrated, especially support through, I think, family resource centers were mentioned previously, as well as within health centers. I'm going to stop there. More information can come from the sexual misconduct. It has a new name.
Support and Resource Center.
Thank you.
It used to be called SMRC, and they've just yesterday's announcement officially announced the new name of SMSRC. And if I can add to that, again, I find it really important that we, again, define our words, because a lot of people interchange sexual misconduct with sexual assault, and yet the vast majority of sexual misconduct is not sexual assault. And so it is not always sexual assault resources that are required. There's often much more complicated and alternative resources for the other things that still come under sexual misconduct as well.
Okay, we're going to have to leave Madame Normandine's minute behind here. Ms. Blaney, 1 minute, please.
Dr. Breek, what work needs to be done and what gaps are there around women's reproductive health and reproductive rights in the military?
In 1 minute. I'm about finding the root cause. So again, anything that helps is great, but the root cause, we won't know what we won't know until we do something at a very broad strategic level that should be helping all of the women. So again, I really, I think of it as a quilt maker. We have all these different departments making quilt pieces, but we don't have a quilt maker yet to make sure all women benefit from knowledge on whether we're menopausal, pregnant, breastfeeding, how and when is it safe or not safe in our newer work environments. Within the CAF specifically, one area, we often talk about the medical, But medical still looks at the primary care as sort of equivalent, but there's another layer that's government. What's the employer job benefits? And other militaries offer egg banking and sperm banking, so that if you know that you are choosing to delay your pregnancy because you want to go on a deployment, or I'm going to Sudan for 2 years, I want my eggs already banked now before I get exposed to whatever I get exposed to. Those are employer job benefits. Obviously, they're not going to be provincial equivalent. So that would be an easy, simple thing that would help support women to have choices, to be able to have eggs
Thank
banked.
you, Ms. Blaney. Ms. Cramp-Newman, 3 minutes. Oh, Cheryl? Okay. Ms. Gallant, 3 minutes.
Breck, with respect to Army, Navy, Air Force, it's one branch where reproductive loss is higher, and if so, which one?
Forward to when this committee puts forward a recommendation that we study these questions. As in fairness and in follow-up, right now, women's health especially is hurt by our electronic patient record, which was, again, ahead of its time at its time, but it does not include easy ways to put down our Gravida, our Para. It does not have easy ways to incorporate pregnancy-related information. It's not set up in a way for us to capture the data easily to do the research on, whereas a newer electronic patient record would actually help address and capture. We're over 30 years now for women doing these, and we should have data, and we don't.
Okay. At what point generally are pregnant members shifted over to the civilian doctors for prenatal care? And once a member with a young child is posted elsewhere, or a newborn comes along the way, how is that child cared for? Because in places like Renfrew County, we have tens of thousands of people on wait lists, and often military families go their whole posting time without ever being assigned a doctor.
Prenatally, when I joined, we were expected to do all of our own prenatal care and then work directly with an OB-GYN, who often actually invited us to be part of the actual delivery. However, as time has progressed, anything to do with women's health issues tended to be outsourced, and it's now considered pretty standard that we outsource almost immediately upon pregnancy, which actually causes a number of issues and problems when you are still actively doing unusual work that needs that occupational medicine oversight. That isn't the job and responsibility of the civilian sector, and so this is where one of our gaps happen. I think we lose a lot of our women unintentionally because we're not always overseeing that occupational level while they're pregnant. When they're pregnant, they're over there. I'll allow my colleague to talk about childcare.
10 seconds, I'm sure. So 2 things. There is a project underway within Health Services now, which is the Women's Health Strategy. We need support to continue to develop that strategy, which includes bringing OB-GYNs on board that will help with some of this oversight and try to reduce that gap. So continued support of the programs already underway is going to be essential, and funding. Secondly, when it comes to childcare, we get stopped every time. I actually have my children in Petawawa, by the way, and it is a showstopper. It impacts operational readiness of jets and planes and tanks. So we need to look at some way of navigating around provincial jurisdictions, and it's definitely worth a project to look at a federal level, controlling our own healthcare systems and funding them.
Ms. Gallant. Final 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Thank you. Okay, then Senator Patterson, I wanted to speak a little bit. You touched on the healthcare increases compared to the CAF healthcare increases. I think I wrote down 0.7% increase in comparison to, the provincial territorial healthcare agreement. Do we have the data that can talk about, because I would assume too that the investments, or we might assume that the investments would be very parallel to, again, the civilian public system, but there also may be a higher need in certain parts of the healthcare spending for CAF. Do we have the data to kind of break that down in terms of how much should we be increasing year over year, and in what particular kind of areas are the priority?
That is a wonderfully complex question and not my current work. So there's 2 things. Healthcare inflation is a Canada-based thing, and because We purchase civilian products. We train from there. Even if we deliver the care, we purchase it, it's based on those inflation rates. So that is data that needs to come from elsewhere. When you look at how much we actually pay, that database is building within the Canadian Armed Forces. When you say, are there going to be specific areas? Healthcare that is delivered to CAF members is always going to be funded. I think my reinforcement piece is controlling how much additional we spend in comparison to a civilian in receiving the exact same service versus what we're doing being charged for, because I have to go back. It's a bucket with water in the bottom. Every time you slosh it one way, there's a space, because the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence make no money. It spends. That's what it does. So what you need to do is you need to indirectly hit it by looking at what we're being charged, where we're being overcharged. I say overcharged. That's my opinion. That doesn't reflect the department. But the data is baseline there and building.
Seconds.
On the daycare piece, if I can quickly get a question in, how would that look? Would we work with provinces and territories to reserve certain spaces, or would it need to be a completely standalone system?
Tell you what we have experienced, and again, doing health and being the champion for women and seeking childcare. The challenge is that daycares are provincially regulated, as well as childcare providers, because it's not a core service delivered by the federal government. Retaining spaces is not possible. And so because it has some federal or provincial funding in there. So it is a model, but we haven't been able to overcome it. What happens is a highly mobile community, which is what the Canadian Armed Forces is, and we tend to be in remote areas where populations don't move. If it has to be open to provinces, as soon as a military member leaves, it's filled by a civilian, which is wonderful, but it means there's no access. So we have to think differently.
Ms. O'Connell. Unfortunately, I have to bring the gavel down on this meeting. You all three have been very helpful in our deliberations. With that, thank you again. Meeting adjourned.